Hey, Year 12. Hope you're kind of getting used to hearing my voice overlaid with the slides. I just thought it might help with the learning just to have kind of like that voice, like the voice of Dory. Dory, just keep swimming, guys. Just keep swimming. Just keep reading. Just keep learning to help you kind of stay focused. Okay, so we know we're doing this session. It's still lesson 7 in the sense that we're still looking at the same article. And our focus is to develop procedural knowledge. So how do I take my theories, everything I know, and apply it? Okay, so just to give you a chance to orientate yourself then, we are looking at that article from yesterday, sections that you're going to be reading, but we're encouraging us to be active readers. So underlining, highlighting, making notes as we read. And we're using the article to kind of focus us on thinking about how social factors, according to the article, determine a person's use of language. So, in other words, what are we learning from this article, this writer's opinion, about the relationship between a person's use of language and society, and how they see themselves in society, how they see themselves socially. And as we saw from last week, those social factors, how can their age, ethnicity, class determine how they're using language? Okay, so we know we introduced that yesterday. And we're doing a really slow, gentle reading activity at the moment, aren't we? We are really, it's like pressing that magic button on your phone when suddenly you start to film things in slow motion and you play it back and everything's slow. Okay, we're doing a really gentle, slow reading activity. So when we began the article yesterday, we only got through the couple of first slides. Now, hopefully this has just given you a minute to orientate yourself, to get your article, your notes, your pens ready to take notes as we continue. And I left you at the end of yesterday's lesson thinking about these key questions. So we're going to just use these as a kind of a starter. Okay, just to check in with the learning that you did at the end of yesterday's lesson to make sure that you had covered the key areas. Okay, so it says here, they say you should always dress for success. But should that extend to the way you speak? We're not adverse, so we're not against dressing appropriately to make a good impression at work or for a social engagement even, if it means wearing clothes we wouldn't normally choose to put on. Is changing your accent to get ahead any different? So this paragraph setting up this lovely dichotomy, this tension, that there are so many areas where we recognise we wear clothes that we wouldn't normally want to. I know in sixth form, one of the things people look forward to is that freedom to choose what to wear to school as opposed to the uniform. But you've done years 7 to 11 in this school, recognising that you put your uniform on, recognising that sometimes we need some standards of dress. Now, a uniform for a school is as much about an identity, showing that you're a part of TCC, than just making students obey rules. But we know, therefore, then that there's different reasons why we might want to dress a particular way. So this question is changing your accent to get ahead any different, getting us thinking in a similar way. So if I would wear particular clothes for my school day, particular clothes for going into work, I have to dress in a particular way as your teacher. There is more freedom, yes, or it would look like more freedom, but I'm definitely not encouraged to wear mini skirts and tank tops. So is it the same then for the way I speak? So if my employer says, I want you to dress this way, Amy, smart, casual, and I want you to speak this way, are those the same things? And that's the tension this article is posing, and this question is changing your accent to get ahead any different. Now, initially, it seems that the answer to the question comes through the example she then gives us. There are some famous people who've done it. So Margaret Thatcher, okay, the 1980s Prime Minister, you'll remember her from Blood Brothers. Okay, she was the Prime Minister in power at that time. She swapped her Lincolnshire accent for a posher one. So Margaret Thatcher had quite a broad Lincolnshire accent when she was younger, and she changed it. She adapted the way she spoke for a posher one, adopting, it says here, the standard received pronunciation, or RP. In other words, she made a choice to change the way she spoke in order to create maybe a more powerful representation of herself, or to be taken more seriously as an MP. And it says here, which at the time was thought to be more in keeping with a position of political power. So Margaret Thatcher chose to converge towards the standard. Okay, now you could say that she was diverging away from the stigma of her Lincolnshire accent. She was trying to move away from the assumption that she was, what's the opposite of being posh, that she was more common because of the way she spoke. So it reminds us that there is this tension between the intrinsic desire, what I choose to do for myself because I want to do it, and the intrinsic extrinsic pressure to conform to a standard. Now, in this third paragraph, more recently, Tony Blair and George Osborne took their own accents in the opposite direction. So, opposite to, so then we've got that cohesive device linking us back to the paragraph. They were moving away from received pronunciation. Okay, they were converging towards a more working class accent, introducing, it says, the more working class Mockney inflections in their upper class speech. Now, it says here that was an attempt to enhance their perceived approachability. In other words, they changed the way they spoke. They diverged away from the stigma of being too posh towards a social acceptance, a social belief that certain working class accents were more approachable. In other words, they wanted people to like them. With such obvious changes to their accents, they were roundly mocked for lacking authenticity. Now, this is an interesting point that our writer's making here. We're really good at picking up on fakes and phonies, aren't we? We don't like people that are fake. We don't like people that are phony. So as soon as Tony Blair and George Osborne, two other MPs, Tony Blair was the Prime Minister for this country in the 1990s, as soon as people change, but in a way that seems fake, we don't like it. We want people to be authentic. And this word authenticity is abstract noun, links to the idea of being authentic. In other words, we like people to be real. If you're not real, I don't trust you. If you're not real, I can spot a fake, a phony a mile away, and I don't like it. So actually, there is something here that although Tony Blair and George Osborne were moving away from this received pronunciation, they were trying to distance themselves from this belief that upper class people were posh and privileged and elitist, which was very much the zeitgeist, the feel of the culture in the 1990s. Actually, they did it in a way though that seemed inauthentic, fake. People didn't like it. So it's a real challenge when we change and adapt to stay authentic. And that's the difference that often comes from when we change, because on the inside, I actually really value the changes I'm making. Yeah, if I change the way I speak because it matters to me, it's going to be an authentic change. People are going to attach to it and trust it. If, however, I feel like I'm putting on something because I'm trying to impress people for the wrong reasons, people smell that a mile off, don't they? Okay, so 3 MPs are cited. So give yourself a tick for Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair and George Osborne. Brilliant. Now, which MP was an example of upward convergence? So here we're reminding ourselves of some of those ideas introduced by Howard Giles last week. Okay, who's moving upwards? The only way is up. Brilliant. There she is, Margaret Thatcher. She was an example of upward convergence. She was moving up the so-called hierarchy, the so-called social scale, by changing her accent. Now, which MP was an example of downward convergence? I've only asked for one here, but I would accept Tony Blair and George Osborne. Either of those two are right answers. And these are really good to bank for future writing. You know, if you're writing your own article, you could still use these examples to illustrate your points. Now, the little change to green. So we're looking for a language level focus here. And it says, which verb phrase shows a negative reaction of the public to these changes? Did you get it? That very last sentence, mocked for lacking authenticity. So verb there is mocked, but it's part of that bigger phrase, roundly mocked for lacking authenticity. So we've got that lovely verb phrase encapsulating the public response. In other words, people took the mick out of Tony Blair and George Osborne because they were fake. Okay, and we're really good at pulling people out, or, you know, calling people out for that fakeness in our society. So again, if you've got that verb phrase, now a little clue, mocked, it is ending in ed. It takes the finite, infinite form to mock. So a little check there. Now, as soon as it's in the ed, we know it's a past tense verb as well. So if you're looking for those levels, those layers of language labeling for higher grades, we've got the past tense, mocked, so it's a dynamic verb, being used. Brilliant. Now over here, now we've talked about this when we were looking at the Jean Aitchison article back in class a little while ago, that writers, so journalistic writers, will track metaphors. In other words, they will use a metaphor and they will keep it going. It's going to be a cohesive device that they're going to make choices at a linguistic language level to keep that idea going. So we've got this familiar idea of dressing for success. Guys, you won't know it. Brilliant song by Roxette in the 1980s, late 1980s, maybe early 1990s, going to get dressed for success. And I also remember Cosmopolitan when I had enough money to buy Cosmopolitan and enough design when I was in my young 20s. Always kind of ran these articles, dressing for success. How did women dress in a way that created that impression, that of being smart and successful. So what other 3 words and phrases did you find that could extend that metaphor? Okay, so we're looking dress for success in that first interrogative. We've then got the repetition of the verb dressing appropriately. Okay, so if you've got that one, brilliant. It then says wearing clothes. So that's linked to that lexical set, all to do with dressing for success. Brilliant. Okay, so we could go there for dress for success, dressing appropriately, wearing clothes. We could talk about the idea then of those 3 all being part of that extended metaphor. So give yourself a tick for those ones. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to look at the next section of this article now. Let me just read it to you, then we'll look at the tasks attached. So it says here, a standard dialect is simply one local variety of language which has become most publicly accepted in social institutions, such as the media, the law, and the government. So this opening declarative, this opening sentence, okay, it's got the subordinate conjunction which in there, so we can quickly upscale to a quick, it's an opening complex declarative. Okay, sets up the idea of this paragraph, classic topic sentence, okay? Introducing the concept of a standard dialect and then explaining it. In many Anglophone countries, the dialect spoken by most of the population is considered to be standard, such as standard American or standard English. So this second sentence then is then building on this idea of what a standard dialect is by giving us some examples. Now it uses this strange phrase, Anglophone countries. Now these are just countries that the primary language spoken is English, and they use America as an example and Australia as an example. Both these are established countries that use English as their first language. So it's saying in these countries, the dialect spoken by most of the population is considered to be standard. Now, this is really interesting because what they're saying here is what defines the standard, what sets the rule for what's acceptable in these countries is the majority dialect. So America and Australia then are examples where if the most people speak it, so this is 2 countries where it is about quantity, where the quantity is greater, where there is a greater quantity of people speaking a particular way, that determines the standard. Now that's really interesting because in the UK, as this next sentence goes on to illustrate, actually something different is happening. So it says here, in the UK, however, the so-called standard, known as RP, or the Queen's English, so that's the standard accent to go with the standard English, is spoken natively by less than 3%. Now, actually, if we've got less than 3% people using RP, that is definitely a minority. That means 97% of the rest of the UK is speaking something that is not RP or the Queen's English. Now, if we were in America, if we were in Australia, that variety being spoken by the 97% of the population would set the standard. It would become the norm provider. It would inform what the standard's going to be. And yet we've got something happening in the UK that is counter that culture. Because here it's saying it doesn't matter that only 3% is speaking it. It's not to do with the amount, the majority of users that make it the standard. It's something else. So RP or the Queen's English is set as the standard, not because the most people use it, but there's something about those 3%. And we might already be anticipating that maybe it's to do with the power and the prestige of that 3%. And so this final sentence of this paragraph, yet, so a little discourse marker there, a little change in direction. It's unreasonable to suppose most Britons it's unreasonable to suppose most Britons are speaking their own language incorrectly. So she's setting up the tension here and saying it's wrong to imagine then that 97% of people are getting it wrong. Okay, so your tasks, we've got a paragraph to complete the paraphrase of the paragraph, and I can just see I've made a typing error there, so I do apologize, guys. So in other words, put this paragraph into your own words. So you can see you've just got to copy and complete that paragraph translation, putting it into your own words. So in a minute you'll pause and do that. Now it says up here, what definition does the writer give for a standard dialect? So just read the beginning of the paragraph again and create your own definition. And then it says in the final sentence, which adjective shows that the intention of the writer is to support accents. So what word choice is our writer making at an adjective level to show that she thinks it's unfair, little clue there, to judge people as being incorrect when they're not.